Welcome to CDP's podcast, Practical for Your Practice.
where we give you actionable intel to support what you do, one colleague to another. Welcome back to Practical for Your Practice. We are so excited that you're here listening with us today. I am Dr. Jenna Ermold, one of your hosts, with the fabulous co-host, Dr. Kevin Holloway. How are you doing today, Kevin?
I'm doing great, Jenna. Thanks for, I don't know, the fabulous thing just throws me off every time because I wasn't expecting it, but I should. But
You
yeah,
should by now, because I
I'm
call you
feeling good.
fabulous all the time. And it's a warm summer day, so there
Yes,
is that. My air
for sure.
conditioner is definitely working pretty hard.
Depending on when you're
Um,
listening to this, I think various parts of the country are under a deep, heat
Heat.
warning right now. So yeah, we got a heat wave going, and maybe if you're listening to this in the wintertime, you can feel jealous or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, things are going to stay pretty heated because this topic I think is pretty hot. You like what I did
Ooh,
there? How that
that was
segue?
fantastic.
How I
That's
brought that
professional.
forward? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like I'm paid to do this.
yeah.
Um, we in this season really wanted to kind of go back to some core principles in interventions, and Kevin and I are, as we've mentioned many times, prolonged exposure trainers.
Hmm.
We are obviously fairly behaviorally, maybe bent in that direction. And we were like, we want to talk about behavior activation and like the power of behavior activation because
Yeah.
it's such a it's simplistic yet so powerful.
Hmm.
Um, and while we were talking about that, I came across a really awesome article by one Dr. Shannon Blakely, who was really talking about how behavior activation can be leveraged in a positive way when working with transitioning veterans. So we are really excited to welcome on the podcast today Shannon, Dr. Shannon Blakely. Welcome to Practical Viewer
Yes,
Practice. We're so
welcome.
psyched you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Big fan of the CDP.
Which we just, we kind of found out Shannon, has been a part of our CDP family even longer than we
Yeah.
thought she was. So welcome today. As we always kind of do, if you can just take a minute to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about who you are and where you work, how you got there, and why you should be talking about this today.
Of course, thank you. Well, I'm a licensed psychologist and a mental health researcher, and at the heart of my clinical work and my research is truly a genuine desire to improve the mental health and well-being of military connected individuals. And that includes improving mental health treatment outcomes, of course,
Hmm.
but also preventing preventable adverse outcomes and promoting the goodness that's possible for everyone. My full-time job is working as a research clinical psychologist at RTI International, which is an independent scientific research institute dedicated to improving the human condition. And in addition to that, I'm co-founder of Redstart Psychological Services,
Hmm.
through which I deliver evidence-based psychotherapies to service members and veterans. And I own that private practice with three of my best friends, which is
So
just such
fun.
a
Nice.
wonderful thing to get to
Yeah.
say. Yes, I'm just so glad to be here. I love this topic. I'm also a behaviorist at heart myself. So this is going to be so much fun.
Great.
Super awesome. That's kind of a dream of mine to someday, be in a practice with three of my best friends.
Highly recommend
Um,
it.
yeah, all right. Well, we'll keep talking about that on the off side. So we will link as everybody knows, we always link things in the show notes. So we'll link the write-up that you did. But one of the things that you highlight in that piece is approximately 200,000 service members transition to civilian life, right? So military life to civilian life each year. And that first 12 months can be a tricky time for them. So let's just sort of start out by setting the stage with why. What about that 12-month window makes it a sort of a critical and high risk window for mental health and even specifically suicide?
Yes, and even to start with the strengths of it, I mean, the first year out of the military is full of incredible opportunities. So
Hmm.
many things are possible. It can be very exciting, but at the same time, yes, transitioning out of the military involves a significant loss. loss of mission, what you do,
Yeah.
purpose, why you do it, the camaraderie, who you do it with, and these forcing mechanisms like routine and structure and accountability that we as psychologists know is healthy for individuals.
Mhm.
Hmm. Hmm.
And all of those things can contribute to military identity. So there's a lot left behind beyond simply the uniform when someone transitions out of the military.
Right.
And with that potential loss, I think we should absolutely expect transitioning service members to have some sort of emotional reaction to that. That distress is normal. It's non-clinical.
Right.
I would be
Right,
concerned
right.
if, yeah, as a service member said they didn't have any uncomfortable feelings about transition, I would be concerned or at least skeptical.
Right.
Um, yeah, but what we
And
know,
I'm
and
so glad you said that. And I want to reinforce that because I
mhm,
think that is something that gets missed all the time. And then we can keep going, but expect the transition period to have opportunity, but it's going to have, it would be unusual for there not to be bumps or for there not to be feelings. And anytime we have that shift in identity, it's just going to bring up a bunch of things. And it's not pathological and it's
no.
not, but it's a really important place to support and intervene for optimal outcomes. Okay, sorry. Keep going.
Absolutely. No, and right behind me, I've got on combat, and they talk about forewarned is forearmed. And that's how I think about some
Mm.
of these strategies, just knowing what to expect, make it that much more easy to manage what can be a challenging situation. But yeah, so transition can be great, transition can be hard. And what we do know, unfortunately, from annual reports is that, as you said, the first year out of the military is associated with the highest risk of suicide among veterans who already
Mm.
have higher rates of suicide compared to non-veteran civilian adults. So people have asked, why is that? We can say that in addition to the distress, potentially even grief around losing all
Mm,
of that the
Right.
military provides, first, there are some immediate, very practical transition needs. Potential stressors like financial problems, relationship problems, legal problems. We know that these are proximal risk factors for suicidal thoughts and behavior, and the transition is associated with potentially some of those experiences.
Yeah.
Drawing from suicide risk theory, we can also imagine that, let's take a newly separated veteran, if they feel like a burden on their family or loved ones or society, they feel like they don't belong, they feel hopeless about that changing, and they have experience with and access to lethal means, we can expect them to be at higher risk of suicide than even maybe veterans who are further out and have perhaps experienced some sort of resolution of those transition stressors.
That's really fantastic and a great reminder, I think, to anybody that's working with service members who are approaching or maybe in the middle of transition recently experienced that. Um, and I think we as Jenna mentioned at the beginning, we're talking about behavioral activation, and so I think like for me, I maybe consider myself maybe a representation of the average provider out there, mental health provider out there, who hears behavioral activation and knows, we've got some good literature on behavioral activation around depression, and like mood kinds of things, and like you said, that there seems to be some of that going on during that transition time. We could have some mood issues and depression along with that, but also like if we're considering this not a pathological kind of a response to transition, like how can we talk about or maybe define behavioral activation in the context of wellness promotion or prevention, rather than as a response to a pathological response?
Absolutely, which is such an important distinction or framing, at least. And I should note, I primarily use behavioral activation, or BA for short, developed by Dr. Carl Lejeune and colleagues. And I specifically like that approach because it places such an emphasis on values. So a lot of my
Mm.
answers are really tied
mm,
to values. And so then inherently, they're both great, but I'm thinking about Lejeun's version. But within a promotion or a prevention context, I think about defining those key elements of BA. So self-monitoring, values clarification, values-based activity scheduling as helping someone be their best self.
mm,
And when I
Mhm.
talk to active duty service members, when I deliver it to the population, I tie it to DoW's emphasis on human performance. So that's a health and functioning promotion, injury prevention model that is explicitly holistic and proactive. When talking with veterans, I might be more likely to frame BA as helping them be who they want to be, live a meaningful life, whatever that means to them.
Mm.
Um, and a point that I make a lot when I'm discussing this topic is that BA strategies don't only work when someone is depressed.
Well,
Yeah.
in the values-based piece, I think again, when we're looking at this, it's an so this transition really is an opportunity, although it doesn't always feel that way, to reflect on what pieces of this military identity really mean something to you, and how did that play out in the military, and how do we bring that forward into the civilian life in a way that isn't going to be exactly like it was in the military, but reflects back those values. Um, and again, I think clinicians out there who are working with someone who recently transitioned or is about to transition, just making sure you're having that conversation. Like a service member is not going to like bring up like, I'm really concerned how my identity is going to change. And, I mean, I think really
Wouldn't that be
bringing,
nice? Yeah.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
normalizing that and really having that deep conversation. Um, so, when we're talking about military culture, which is, Kevin knows I could talk about military culture for hours and admit that I'm a culture dork, but really heavily centered, as you just talked about, human performance, team, mission readiness, problem solving. How does BA kind of naturally align with that and leverage that sort of state of mind, if you will, or state of way of living?
hmm BA accommodates that to the extent that it's important to the service member or a veteran or anyone, coming from that sort of cultural viewpoint and engaging in BA. In my experience working with service members and veterans, though, the notion of clarifying or self-identifying personal values as opposed to accepting the ones given to you
Mm,
Right.
is new,
right.
confusing, icky,
Right.
uncomfortable. And for the record, I'm not sure civilians are any better, are much better at it than the military community. But to your point, it can be a shift for service members to decide for themselves what matters most to them
Right.
across, different parts of their life, not only their job, but these other domains of functioning or areas of life areas, as Lejwe and colleagues would describe them. Um, what someone stands for, who they want to be across those different areas of their life can be language that I find to get more traction.
Mm.
And I usually offer a metaphor of a compass in my practice. So thinking about a compass pointing you in the direction of north. And you never get to north so much as you let north guide you. You can
Mm,
only move closer to or further away from north. But even if you get off track, as we all do for the record, you can always reorient and resume going in that northbound direction. And so that's what values are, at least how I talk about them in my work. They're aspirational, they're directional. These are never checked off the list, guiding principles. Although I had a client last week ask me if I was saying, like, could you never get to true north or never get to magnetic north? So calling me out of that distinction, which was a first for me, caught me off guard. Sometimes SEALs are just too smart for their own good.
right.
But if someone is genuinely struggling to get started, I'll ask them to start with what the military has taught them that they want to carry forward into their
Yeah.
personal lives, just as you said, and when the uniform comes off. So I guess a final sort of strategy or way that I do this is I ask them to consider an important part of their life or their identity and finish the sentence. It's important for me to dot, dot, dot.
Mm,
So it's important for me to be a dependable coworker, to be a loving spouse, to prioritize time outdoors, to give back to the military community, to feel connected to something that's bigger than myself. Some life areas are going to be easier to answer that question than others, but that's
yeah.
okay. And that's also probably telling you something.
I love that. And I love that you said too that it's not something necessarily that civilians are automatically good at either, right? I mean, I'm thinking about like ACT, acceptance and commitment
hmm
therapy, and other, third wave therapies that are really focused on, identifying and making choices consistent with your values. And just starting there, asking someone, well, what are your values? That's a tough place for, I think, all of us.
hmm
Not just those who have served in the military and where maybe their experience was, it seemed like many of their values were given to them or, part of Soldier's Creed or, other kinds
Like
of
literally, these are your
ethos.
core values.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
You need
Right.
to repeat them. Here
No
they are.
discussion. Yeah.
Yeah.
And transitioning away from that doesn't need to be, okay, I'm not there and those aren't my values anymore. But even trying to figure out, well, what, like you just said, like, what do I want to carry forward? What's important to me? Even in the civilian population, I find that's a struggle at times for folks to identify, well, what is important to you? what are values that you value, not because you were told that they were valuable and you had to carry that forward, but what really means something to you. So I love that you started there. Like that's such an important thing for any of us to think about what our values are
Absolutely.
and what's important to us and what motivates us.
You have to be really honest with yourself and be willing to feel uncomfortable and willing to recognize that your actions may not line up with their answer to that
Right.
sentence. Yeah.
Well, and I imagine too, sort of just that reminder that it may take a minute, given that there is this shift from um, kind of external locus of control to
hmm
internal locus of control, and that if we interpret like I don't know or I can't figure this out, isn't resistance, rather like kind of flexing a muscle in a slightly different way that's going to take a little time to
Mhm.
figure out
Right.
how. So I imagine patience can be helpful in not pushing the process too quickly as you're trying to support somebody to really think about that piece would be important.
Right. Perseverance, embracing the suck. There's all these analogies
Right.
that you can
Right.
drop that military community clients have. I mean, they did this huge adjustment coming into the military, so why
Mhm.
could they not also re-clarify these things for themselves on their way out?
And I love that too because again, like it's nothing. It may not be something that most of us have thought intentionally about what my values are, and I imagine just even that process of working through that and exploring and identifying and being able to verbalize
Yeah.
what somebody's values are. That in and of itself can be really important part of that transition too, of discovering who they are.
hmm
And I have kind of just it'd be helpful, I think, to hear an example of when
Right.
you are working with a military connected client. And this, I imagine, could be a family member as well. Because again, when we talk about military culture, it's not just the service member transitioning, it's a
Hmm.
family,
hmm
it's the family transitioning. But how do you bring this up? Like, how do you bring up, hey, transition's hard. And if we're sort of intentional and we look at our values and we, kind of proactively engage in some behaviors consistently. Like, how do you tend to bring this up to clients as something that's important for them to look at?
Right. As much as I would love this to be, like you were saying earlier, something I could diagnose tra doing the transition and could like bill and just give everybody the skill. Usually when it comes up naturally is sort of this confusion or dissonance around two things. One would be this, in my terms, someone has a value. I'm picking up on that, and there's an obstacle getting in the way, and that's frustrating. So they need to figure out a
Hmm.
problem solve or navigate that. Or maybe more often and more difficult is two values in opposition.
Hmm.
So you want to have both, but you can't actually act on both in that moment. So how do you negotiate or manage those situations? And so I think back to the last time that I brought this up clinically, it's just acknowledging, like I said, like, hey, there's a lot of change going on, and you're trying to figure out what the best way for it is. So how would you feel if I described a strategy that I tend to find be very helpful with others? And then I kind of give the orientation spiel. And if they're into it and they haven't just, big eye, deer in the headlights, fear, panic about like who am I and who do I want to be, then I just go right into it. I've through experimenting with this, have found a way to break it up that feels doable in nice little chunks. And so it feels just it's so great to see the clarity that comes out. That's what I think it is. It's you don't solve all the problems and fix everything or have a clear plan or a finite plan, but you do have clarity around where you want to be going. That's the compass of the values that alone can provide a lot of relief and sort of optimism around, okay, I don't know where I'm going, but I know I'm going to get there.
Would you be able to say what those four chunks are?
Yeah, so I start off, this is where I deviate from Dr. Leger's approach, and I just assume that's all they're just my own style or limitations of my own as a clinician, but I break up the values clarification from activity brainstorming. And I should say it was, I had the benefit of being trained in a variant of Dr. Leger's approach by Dr. Stacy Daughters, who used it to treat individuals with co-occurring depression and substance use disorders. So that was actually my original BA framework.
Hmm.
But the values piece ended up being harder to clarify, at least in working with this population. With me as the clinician, we needed more time than I was anticipating going through it. And
Hmm.
so we don't worry about what does that look like in practice. We stay in these sort of abstract, aspirational, directional compass directions. And only when that's been really locked in, that filling in the sentence, it's important for me to dot, dot, dot. Do I then move forward into the second chunk, which would be Identifying specific behaviors, activities that someone can do starting tomorrow that lets them live in line with their values. And typically, you get a lot of excited individuals who identify these midterm, long-term goals.
Right.
And so you have to stop and break those down and like use the SMART activity acronym, SMART acronym. So you break those down into tinier pieces. You have to hit the 5 meter target before you start aiming further away. And once those are specified or populated across different life areas, and when I say life areas, I use six. The first is relationships. So these would be direct personal ties, family, friends, coworkers, romantic partners. Community involvement, which is identifying with larger groups. So, for example, the military community.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Work and education. So work could be the job you have, a job that you want to get. Education could be formal or informal. The fourth category is hobbies and recreation, which usually stumps people. But it is important to spend leisure time and have
Right.
like ways, right, to get outlet that might be creativity, it might be art, it might be, nature, it can be anything for someone. The fifth category is physical and emotional health. So that's medical wellness, physical fitness, but also emotional or psychological health.
Hmm.
And then finally, spirituality, which can be a specific religion, but is actually a bit broader than that. It's identifying with feeling connected to something bigger than and outside of yourself. So that can involve practicing philosophy or mindfulness or just being connected to nature.
Hmm.
So that's six areas. Imagine the matrix, six areas, at least one value for each, and a handful of activities for value, right? That can be like a lot.
A lot. Yeah.
And so a recent metaphor we've used to calm down that overwhelm right away is a menu of options. Do you ever go to a restaurant and the waiter's expecting you to eat all the salads, have all the soups, all the entrees and desserts? Of course not.
Well, if I walk
Right.
in, maybe.
If it's a buffet, maybe, but yeah, yeah, like yeah,
Right.
absolutely great metaphor.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, cool. You get to pick and choose in based on the practicalities or what feels right at the time,
Yeah,
which
what are you
moves
hungry for?
exactly what feels good today, which really is what value do you want to work on today,
Hmm.
tomorrow, the next day, thinking out in advance, because we know from a lot of psychological science that if you proactively plan and visualize and contingency plan, you're more likely to be set up for success.
Right.
So that is the third skill, which is activity scheduling or daily planning, as I call it. Action planning works well in this population as well.
Mm,
And it's selecting smart, values-based activities to bring into life that provides thinking back to risk and protective factors for distress or suicide during transition, feelings of belongingness. You're engaging with people that you care about who
mhm,
care about you, getting those memories and positive experiences. You're also less likely to feel like a burden if you're making progress in these very important parts of life. I think about the translation of military values. So I think of loyalty or being like part of a team, you
mhm,
may not be doing that the same way, but you can still be staying true to it. So now
Hmm.
maybe being a good teammate is changing the baby's diaper when your spouse is
mhm,
tired or has their hands full. So it
Yep.
just manifests in different ways. And then the fourth chunk is problem solving.
mm.
Because people are gonna hit transition stressors. Also, unfortunately, I hate to break it, the civilian world has a bunch of stressors and obstacles
Right.
unrelated to military transition. And then, yeah, what
People
happens?
you don't just have like healthcare appointments assigned to you. You actually have to go do that yourself. That was a lesson
No,
I learned. I was like, wait a minute, why isn't my annual appointment just being made for me and I have to show up and I get in trouble if I don't? So yeah,
yeah, I
all
have to
those
pay if I
pieces.
don't. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, and Um, but thinking back to when there's obstacles to values pursuit, but also if there's two values in conflict. And so this is an example that I pull into this work from a long time ago client where they had low back pain from military service.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
really intense back pain. They also really loved being a father, and their kid was on the basketball team, and they wanted to go to these games, and those bleachers were awful, very
Mm,
uncomfortable. So what does this veteran do? He wants to both take care of his body, also his mood, and when he's in pain, but he also wants to show his support for his son. And so how do you navigate that? Well, problem solving can help you identify solutions that aren't so black and white. And military community clients have these skills. We're just activating them or translating them to this new context. So mission planning, military decision-making process, pace planning, again, these skills, we're just drawing on them and calling them different things potentially. So those are
Mm.
the four ways that I break it down. When we spend in clinic, I spend as much time as the person needs in each stage until moving on.
Hmm.
So much great information, and I think in some ways familiar to a lot of us, right? Like we know kind of some basics about behavioral activation, but such a great application and context to put it in this particular situation. So part of me wants to say, hey, could you give us an example of, a client kind of going through that? But in some ways, then I'm also reminded that it's very similar to what our theme is this season. So you may be aware, and hopefully our listeners are aware, that this season we're focusing on impactful moments or the moments that changed us. So kind of those, if you will, somebody called it the other day like a canon event, right? The thing that kind of stands out as maybe a pivot point in our life when it could be good, it could be not so good, but just really kind of clarifies for us maybe what our values are, or kind of we're going in the right direction, or whatever that may be. And so I wonder, and I don't know if this is two questions or one question, but maybe do you have an example of a situation, a story perhaps, of just those impactful moments that had a big impact on you, your personal life or your career or all of the above, and maybe related to behavioral activation working with clients? It doesn't have to be, but
Tall order. No, I think I can do
lots
it.
of questions all wrapped into one, huh?
Yes. No, I think the origin of this arc is I had the absolute joy and fortune to train both at VA Puget Sound in Seattle and the VA Mid-Atlantic MIREC here in Durham, North Carolina, where I still
Mm,
am. Incredible training in both places.
Mm.
And through my clinical internship in Seattle and my postdoc, I inadvertently prioritized a caseload of newly separated veterans. And at the
mm.
time, I didn't know why. I just wanted them and had the luxury of being a trainee that they let you do that. So I had curated this caseload. And by definition, because they were coming to clinic, they had a verified diagnosis. So we were doing treatment for a clinical problem.
Yeah.
But in addition, in the background, in parallel, were these transition adjustment identity questions. And I didn't recognize them or have the best language for them at the time, but I definitely recognized them and I was curious about them. And I wanted to incorporate that into the treatment plan, even though I had no EPP book behind me that told me how to do that yet. Um, and then another element here was I have two grandfathers who served in the military, but that
Mm.
wasn't talked about a lot. It was a positive experience for them both, but it wasn't part of the family conversation. I had not
Yeah.
served. So I had a lot of, I would say, insecurity around my lack of military cultural awareness.
Mm,
And so every book I could find, I was reading it, every podcast I could find, I was listening to it. And there's one that's no longer on, but it's called the War Chest Podcast. I liked that one a lot. It was perfect for me at the time of trying to absorb everything I could in order to be more effective and helpful in clinic.
yeah.
And I ended up connecting one-on-one with the host, and we had some chats and just talked about the stories around transition and what, in his hindsight, would have been helpful getting out. Fast forward a few years where it really crystallized was when I met someone named Phil Gant. Phil Gant is
Mm,
my partner in how I think about all of this now. Phil is a retired Green Beret. He
Mm.
works for the Honor Foundation, which is a nonprofit that supports transitioning service members from the special operations
mm,
community.
mm,
And so he's down near Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And we just had these ideas that were aligned, but we didn't know how to talk about it. I was coming from a very scientific lexicon. He was
mm,
coming from a very thoughtful, deep, insightful, philosophical
mm,
sort of framework. And
Mhm.
we were marrying our ideas and language together, and figuring out how we wanted to talk about military transition stressors in this non-clinical way, how to get ahead of military transition suicide in an effective way.
yeah.
Um, and he kept me really honest because I'm coming from the end of the continuum of interventions. So I'm at treatment. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. I'm trained to treat
Right.
disorders and problems. And so I thought I was getting like really proactive by talking about prevention. And he really made sure to pull me up earlier. Like, you're missing the
Mm,
mark. You can do the prevention while promoting the good. So now we talk about it's not only
yeah.
preventing the bad, but it's boosting the good. So
Yeah.
that's really
Right.
where I got pulled into well-being promotion with benefits being reduced risk for adverse outcomes.
Mm.
So those were the experiences that got me where I am and connected to the people who helped me do this work.
and it's so crazy to me that we don't really understand the importance of that lens versus
Yeah. Yeah.
the more typical one. But and the only that's a really cool story. And I should mention that is your co-author also on that piece, I
Yes,
believe. Correct? Yes.
it
So
is.
we will make sure we give due props. But I remember I used to do a lot of eating and weight management stuff, and we used to you can focus on removing things from your diet, or you can talk about adding in more greens, adding in more,
Hmm.
different colored vegetables.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that it's such a better way to go about doing things. Like instead of, getting you to stop doing these things that are going to be risky for you, how do we, add into your diet of life, if you will,
Exactly.
all these colors and all these things that are going to be, um, not just preventive, but just really kind of optimize,
Right.
your lived experience, your day to day. So I really think that's cool that he balanced out
Yes.
your
Yes.
clinicalness and kind of pulled you over here to be like, let's not even talk prevention. Let's talk,
Yeah.
just promotion and lifting wellness promotion. That's really cool.
Yeah.
He's the best. Yeah.
So this has been truly delightful, and I love that we,
Definitely.
Kevin,
Definitely.
if you can't tell, you listeners, you can't see our smiling faces, but we've been smiling the whole time. Um, One thing that we always like to leave our listeners with is if you're interested in this area, if you want to start putting more colorful food into people's diet of life, you want to, increase your utilization of BA for well-being. What would be some practical things somebody could do tomorrow in their clinic or resources that you'd like to mention? We call it actionable intel. What's actionable intel they can take forward to really implement some of this tomorrow? And we will, of course, link the awesome article as well.
Thank you.
Incoming actionable intel.
I would say the most important step to incorporating some of the things that we discussed during this conversation is finding your own individual language to define and elicit values. It is
Hmm.
so hard. Is very challenging. These are heady concepts.
Yeah,
Once someone gets it, oh, they're locked in and it's fantastic. So
Yeah.
once you
Yeah.
can get there, it's smooth from then on. But finding your own voice as a clinician for what's your metaphor? I use a compass because it comes to me naturally. I can field minus that one curveball. I can field
right.
questions and clarifications around it. So just taking time to practice and talk to your pillow or your empty chair or your sleeping cat and find the words that feel natural coming out of your mouth and feel true to you. Because if you clearly understand and are confident and believe in what you're explaining, that's half the work, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so making sure that you have a good way to talk about values and a language and a metaphor that you can stand behind. Are there, like, if people want to learn a little more about the transition period or um, any useful tools or things like that that they can access to your knowledge?
Certainly, lots of academic articles come to mind. I would say the first author who helped me to understand this was Carl Castro, Dr. Carl Castro.
Hmm.
His work is really good, especially if you're new to it. And I would say the original, well, the revision, 2011 Behavioral Activation Treatment for Depression, manual by Dr. Carl Ledgway and colleagues. It is freely available. If you search it, it's published in Behavior Therapy. There's a lot of good illustrative examples.
Hmm.
And so that could be a source to learn and then take my advice for how do you make that your own.
Yeah. And we can add links to all of the
Oh,
resources
great.
that you mentioned into the show notes for folks to
Great.
look at and look up.
And I mean, the only one I would add is don't be afraid to talk about it, and
Yeah.
don't, and bring it up in a non-pathologizing way. If you are, again, where are you in your transition? How is that going for you? What's gone well? What's been tough? And normalize that it is, recognize it for what it is.
Mhm.
Be willing to talk about it, and again, in the back of your mind, be thinking about this shift from pathology to how do I promote wellness through, kind of encouraging this incorporation of meaningful behaviors into somebody's life in an
Precisely.
intentional way.
Hmm.
One thought I had as a possible actionable intel too is for each of us, listeners, all of us here, let maybe we can think about what our values are right now. Like I said, I don't know. It's something that we just naturally know or can verbalize right off the bat. And so I think it's a great exercise to think about for ourselves. What's my values? And in some ways have a little bit of that experience of what we're about to ask a client to do. It can be sometimes a journey in and of itself, recognizing what our own values are.
And revisiting them over time, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And remembering the 4 chunks in the 6 areas. And we'll be pulling the word chunk into the title. It's all about chunks
technical jargon.
Exactly. But I think even just remembering those 6 areas that you mentioned and sort of the way you chunk it to actually then tackle it was really cool. So, Shannon, it's been a delight, and
it really has. Thank you.
I really appreciate the work that you're doing at RTI, but also, kind of in your day-to-day clinical work with your besties. And we hope that we'll maybe have you back another time and see what you're up to in the next few years. But it's been a delight, and I'm going to go assess my values and, take some time to think about it.
Yeah. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. Like, if you want to drop us a line, an email, or leave us a voicemail on our speak pipe, tell us a little bit about what your values are or what your experience with behavioral activation has been. Or if you want to share an impactful moment, we'd love to hear it. And if you're willing, maybe share it on a future episode too. All the ways to get in contact with us will be in the show notes.
Thank you both so much.
Yeah, and until next time,
stay curious
and mind your EBPs.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Be sure to subscribe to Practical for Your Practice to be notified when new episodes arrive. Our theme music is Failed Attempts by Nitro, and our administrative assistant is Bree Mercer. This podcast is produced by CDP at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Uniformed Services University, the Department of War, or the U.S. government. In addition, references to any specific companies, products, processes, or services does not necessarily constitute or imply endorsement by the Uniformed Services University, the Department of War, or the U.S. government.